with that, I won't hold us up longer. I want to introduce our speaker for this evening, Mark Neuhengen. He is the Director of Evangelization and Parish Mission at St. Teresa of Avila Parish here in Chicago. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Mark.
Hello, as Miriam said, I'm Mark Neuhengen. I'm the Director of Mission and Evangelization at St. Teresa of Avila in Chicago. I think she just said that, I don't know why. But I am here to give a short, to lead a conversation on conservative Catholic media and its rise over the last, I'll say, 30, 40 years. And so I'm gonna share my screen. I have a feud against Zoom that I hate. Here we go. All right, here we go. And like they said, feel free to put questions in the chat as you like. So my presentation is called "I'm Tired of You, Liberal Church in America, EWTN and the Rise of Conservative Catholic Media in America." And why I feel comfortable talking about this topic. I was actually, while I was at Loyola Chicago, honored to be able to be a Ramanat scholar, where I was able to take a specific element of Catholic history and study it in depth. So I, of course, chose to talk about EWTN, the Eternal Word Television Network, and its influence in United States history. And if you don't know what EWTN is, or you need more context, we'll talk more about that as we move forward. And so I think, before we get started, it's important to talk a little bit about historical context. Not a lot of people know this, but there's actually a really long history in American society of Catholic media pundits, which I think is pretty funny. I'm going to focus on two specifically in this kind of introduction. On the left, you can see Father Charles Kaufman. He was prominent in the early 20th century. He was actually the pastor of a church outside of Detroit. And he had a radio show that went across the entirety of the country. Thousands and thousands of people listened to him every week. And his big issue that he talked about, that he focused on often, was actually the Jewish people in America. He was viciously anti-Semitic, and he was actually also very anti-New Deal, with the programs that eventually gave us Social Security and the expansion of the welfare state. He was huge in his program of attacking those programs while they were coming through the pipeline. And so Father Kaufman's big issue was against the Jews and the kind of welfare policies. On the right, there was kind of a genesis moving in through the next few decades. On the right, we have Bishop Fulton Sheen. He was a bishop in New York in the 50s and 60s, and he had a show called Life is Worth Living, which was actually, this is kind of hard to believe in 2020, where we're in a more kind of secular, popular culture, but it was one of the most popular shows, and it competed against like their equivalent of the Big Bang Theory at the time. Like, people would turn away from popular comedy shows to watch Fulton Sheen. And where Father Cochran's big issue was anti-Semitism, the Jews and being an anti-Semite, Fulton Sheen's big issue, thing through his show, was communism, that he was against communism as a philosophy, the Soviet Union, and he spent many episodes talking about that issue. Another fun fact about Fulton Sheen, I read an article a few days ago that he was actually one of the first Catholic opponents of psychoanalysis, and so he gave tons of episodes criticizing psychoanalysis, to the point where he had to write a letter apologizing against the Catholic Society of Psychologists for his attacks on a specific kind of psychology. And so that leads us to talking about kind of the main character of our presentation today, and it's Mother Angelica of the Annunciation. And so I'm going to play just this quick clip that you can kind of get an understanding of who she is as a person and her kind of media personality.
No, you made a statement that was not accidental. And this is just as much a lie as the lies we got last night. I am so tired of you liberal church in America. And everything you've ever done has gone in silence. Nothing you've done, from your witchcraft to your angiograms to your centering prayer, to all this earth spirituality, to replacing holy water with sand, to destroying our churches and closing churches that are viable and ready to go. No, this is not an accident. We've swallowed this now for 30 years. And I'm tired of it. We have swallowed enough of your idea of God. And you have really no God. You have no dogma, no doctrine, and no authority. Because the only authority in the Catholic Church is our Holy Father and the Magisterium. And you have disclaimed that. You don't believe in the Eucharist. You don't believe in the Immaculate Conception. You don't believe in the virgin birth. You don't believe in Mary's power of intercession. You don't believe in religious life. You don't believe in being a spouse of Christ. You do believe in teaching to little children of the third grade sex education. You do believe in forcing centering prayer and forcing inclusive language upon us. And now you depict Jesus as a woman. You're sick. But I admit you have a right to your ways. You have a right to think your thoughts. You have a right before God and this nation to do what you do. But I resent you trying to destroy the Catholicity of the simple and the poor and the elderly by your ways. I'm not going to accept that.
Yeah, so a light clip to start our presentation. So while you have that kind of, so what I'm looking for, monologue in your mind, I'll try and keep this kind of idea as we flow through this presentation, that following World Youth Day, Mother Angelica employed populist rhetoric against inclusive language and quote-unquote liberal bishops. Modern Catholic conservative media continues to employ this rhetoric to a greater degree by attacking specific individuals and movements. So where Father Cochrane attacked the Jews and the New Deal, where Fulton Sheen attacked communism, Mother Angelica attacked inclusive language and liberal bishops, and now modern Catholic media takes that to a greater extent. And you'll see that as we move through. So I'm going to do a quick run through of the life of Mother Angelica. She was born Rita Rizzo in 1923 in Canton, Ohio. You can see that's an older picture of Canton on the left. Her grandparents actually owned a bar, and Mother Angelica claimed that because of that, she was able to communicate with people of all different levels of life, whether that's prostitutes, construction workers, management class, stuff like that. And she had kind of a rough childhood. Her father had left her family while she was young, and her mother had severe mental health issues that prevented her from kind of living a healthy childhood. And she also had a lot of physical issues. She had abdominal pain and abdominal issues, and that led her eventually to seek out the woman on the right, named Rhonda Wise. She's kind of a Midwestern Catholic folk hero, is the best way I'll describe her. She was a woman in Ohio who she had a terrible life. Her husband was an alcoholic. She had severe health issues, and she prayed to God over and over. And eventually one night, supposedly, Jesus and Saint Teresa of Lisieux visited her, healed her of her ailments, cured her husband of alcoholism, and gave her the stigmata of the wounds of Christ on her hands. And so then Rita Rizzo went to this woman, prayed with her, and she eventually was healed of her abdominal issues, which then motivated the future Mother Angelica to join a convent in the South. The Poor Clare is kind of a subset of the Franciscan umbrella. And actually, Rhonda Wise's house is still there. It's a shrine. So if you want to take a really fun vacation, you can drive out to Ohio. I realize I'm not in prison mode, and you can go there. And so she eventually became a nun. That's a picture, a younger picture of her on the left. And she was actually kind of a businesswoman nun before she became a media personality. The two big kind of initiatives that come up in her life is that she sold fishing lures. She got her monastery to kind of sell a bunch of, they called it St. Peter's lures. And actually it got written up in Sports Illustrated in the 80s or in the 70s. So this is an article from Sports Illustrated in the 70s, from the 70s or 80s about her initiative. So I thought that was pretty cool. Also the classic camera on the left, I love too. Yeah, and so after the fishing lures kind of died out, she kind of transitioned her monastery into selling peanuts, which she called the Little Old Peanut Company, and she sold them all throughout the South. And so she kind of, I believe that this is kind of where she started to develop kind of a business acumen as a person, which is interesting. And so on one hand, in her young nun life, she became a business, kind of got a business acumen. And then eventually she also, hold on, there we go. She started to get into kind of pastoral teaching work. The first book she wrote is on the left. It's called Journey into Prayer. It was kind of a, it's kind of your generic scripture reflections and stuff like that. And the nuns that were under her would actually take this book and leave it in malls, public places for people to read, which I kind of think is an interesting development and marketing strategy. And then she eventually started doing talks. She recorded cassette tapes, which, you know, I'm 23, so I don't know what those are. And that eventually led her to doing recordings. And so the 2-disc bonus set on the right has one of those is called Our Hermitage. That was actually her first video video performances in the word, but like video thing of her on video, and it was on the Christian Broadcasting Network, which you don't know, if you don't know what that is. It was a kind of a conservative Protestant network that I'm not sure if it's still around, actually. I have to probably figure that out. But they, at the time, they were trying to look for opportunities to open their market to Catholic viewers. And so they used Mother Angelica's Our Hermitage as kind of a programming on their channel. The book I read about her claims that Our Hermitage is absolutely terrible, which I thought was pretty funny. I guess they claimed that it's very flat and she isn't very dynamic, but it was very much like a first steps kind of thing for Mother Angelica. And so that leads us to Mother Angelica Live. Mother Angelica Live was her television show, which was started in 1981 and lasted until 2001, which was a long time for a show to go on. There's a lot of kind of background that I don't have time getting into about how she built EWTN, but I'll talk about a book later that you'll be able to kind of get that information, how she got from preaching and selling peanuts to media company. But eventually she got to having her own show on her own channel called Mother Angelica Live. And if you've never seen Mother Angelica Live, it's definitely a very interesting show. So it would be about an hour. The first half, there would be a specific topic that Mother Angelica would pick out beforehand. It could be anything from St. John of the Cross to the Rosary to morality to modesty, and she would take that issue and literally riff on it for half an hour. She had no script, which I think is absolutely amazing from a kind of presenting perspective. And so because of that, she would really she would talk about a lot of different things in one episode. Some might say it's unfocused, but it was just a very interesting way to run a show. And then the second half, after she kind of stopped doing her freestyling on a topic, she would take calls from the audience, or she would take questions from the audience. And those are interesting because they would run from kind of either there'd be really like specific niche Catholic questions, like does the Vatican teach that we have free will, or stuff like that, or it's like very personal kind of emotional questions. So it's or like kind of very terrible things, like someone called, I remember I watched an episode where someone called in about someone's, like she was being abused by her husband, and so what do I do with this? And there's a and so that's like a one level of seriousness, but there's also like kind of inner family drama that she would get calls about, like I'm disagreeing with my mother-in-law, how do I do that? Which I think is an interesting take. And so the interesting thing about Mother Angelica, and what I want to go more into, is that there's definitely almost 2 seasons of her kind of media life. There was the pre-World Youth Day 1993 and post-World Youth Day 1993. And I'll explain the difference between them in a few minutes, but in pre-World Youth Day, Mother Angelica's kind of episodes were kind of very apolitical, surprisingly. They were very much about, like, how do I be a good Catholic? How do I pray? How do I pray the rosary? How can I be a good neighbor? She kind of delved a little bit into culture war-y topics. I remember there was one episode from like 1992 where she kind of made fun of people who dyed their hair weird colors. So it's like, that's not like a serious issue, but it's kind of mirrors culture war, kind of, these people are different than me, how do I interact with them kind of ways. And she even kind of talked about issues that could be seen as progressive, or at least popular in more progressive areas of the Catholic Church. There's an episode before 1993 where called Just Wage, where she talks about how the managerial class managers should give a living wage to their employees, which is kind of not really seen in this sector of Catholicism, or as much, which I thought was interesting when I watched it. And then World Youth Day happened. World Youth Day, if you don't know what it is, it technically happens every year, but every few years the Pope brings youth from all around the world together to one location to kind of spur interest in Catholicism, Catholic thought, Catholic social teaching, a lot of different things. Fun fact, the modern incarnation was started by John Paul II, who was inspired by the United Nations that was doing similar things for youth around the world. And so in 1993, the World Youth Day occurred in Denver, Colorado, and John Paul II visited the United States for a few days to have World Youth Day. And at one part of the week, they had a Stations of the Cross, and the Stations of the Cross had it's your typical Stations of the Cross, but the one thing that was different was that they had a woman play Jesus. And that video I showed you at the beginning of the presentation was Mother Angelica's response that night to watching that Stations of the Cross. She went on her channel that night to riff on how evil it was that they had a woman play Jesus. If you actually go into the news, kind of the newspapers at the time, it turns out that the reason a woman played Jesus was that the acting troupe that was doing the Stations of the Cross, the only person that looked like Jesus was the young woman, because everyone else was an older man in their 40s, 50s, so there's kind of out of practicality, but that didn't stop Mother Angelica. And so after 1993, it's like night and day. Her show is radically different. It becomes a culture war nightmare, as I like to say. Almost every episode is about something that has to do with culture war, even if it's not like purposely. If it's like a topic on like St. John of the Cross, like she'll make it into a culture war issue. And when I say culture war issue, I'm talking about like feminism, abortion, stuff that creates a lot of kind of emotional race in America, that causes a lot of like emotional turmoil among people who kind of who sit more on the conservative side and more progressive side. And so there were kind of two specific, I'm just going to take two specific things out of like her wide repertoire of shows after 1993 that she attacked. One was inclusive language in liturgy and scripture. And so in the 1990s, the USCCB was looking to try to do a new translation of the scripture and mass into English that would be generally more inclusive. So if anyone, some people here might not be Catholic, but if you are Catholic, I don't know, Weal, probably Catholic. But if you're in mass now, the language that's used is still very male orientated and assumes that the viewer and the listener is male as a person, as the person in the congregation is male. And so and there's a whole theological debate in this that I'm not qualified to talk about, and I'll probably get in trouble with the Pope if I do. So I'm not going to do that. But Mother Angelica heard about this and actually went on her show and asked her kind of crowd, her audience, her viewing audience, to write to the Bishops' Conference to kind of tank this motion. And it worked, at least according to some writers. They claim that it had an influence on how the bishops and created a new, or went about talking about language, which I think is interesting. And you see this, you see this earlier. If you want a specific example, in that video I showed you, she said something along the lines of, you try to make God a woman, stuff like that. And in her show, she attacks the issue often. And so if there's any Catholic that was a kind of people who are super steeped in the Catholic world, who are around in the 90s, this is probably the episode that you remember most of. And it was her attacks on the Cardinal on the left, Cardinal Mahoney of, I believe, Los Angeles. And so the story goes, in the 90s, the Cardinal wrote what's called a pastoral letter to the Catholics of LA. And it's called Gathering Faithfully Together. And it was a document about how the Eucharist and the Mass, at the end of the day, is kind of a bringing together of community. And Mother Angelica read Gathering Faithfully Together and, surprise, surprise, absolutely hated it. She believed that Cardinal Mahoney was denying the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And the thing that got her in trouble was, on her show, she said something along the lines of, if I was a nun in that diocese, I would have no obedience to that bishop. And so Cardinal Mahoney was offended by this, felt that she was attacking him as attacking his teaching authority as a bishop by saying there's no authority, I wouldn't listen to him, and attacked his belief in the Eucharist, which was, as a cardinal and a high-ranking member of the Catholic Church, is kind of a big deal. So it's kind of a funny story, in my opinion. Cardinal Mahoney then wrote to Mother Angelica to ask her to read an apology on her show. She subsequently read the apology and then continued to insult and point out errors in her review of Cardinal Mahoney immediately after reading the letter, which I think is absolutely interesting. And there was never really a conclusion to that debate, but I've heard it. I heard the story. I gave a version. I've talked about this with a few different people who were kind of in Catholic circles back then, and they kind of still remember this kind of attack. And then on the right, you have Bishop David Foley, who was the former Bishop of Birmingham, who was the Bishop of where EWTN is headquartered. It's currently headquartered outside of Birmingham in Irondale, Alabama. And there were two kind of spats with the bishop, Bishop Foley. The first one, the bishop wanted to do what's called an apostolic visit to the monastery, and which is kind of an in-depth look on how they work, the organization of the monastery and stuff like that. And Mother Angelica absolutely refused him out of hand and said, "You were not allowed to come kind of investigate us." And that was kind of very controversial at the time, and it really offended him. And so eventually the kind of tensions between them simmered, and they were Mother Angelica allowed Bishop Foley to come and say mass at EWTN in the monastery that's there. But at one point, they redid the monastery. And they changed the chapel, and so before the renovations, they had an altar against the back wall. And so if you were going to do mass, you had to face away from the congregation, a more traditional style of worship. And when they did the renovations, they had a freestanding altar, probably what you're more familiar with in most Catholic churches today. And Mother Angelica still wanted him to do the traditional style of mass. And Bishop Foley said, I'm not going to do that. And so they went back and forth. They eventually allowed the bishop to do it in the more new way. But some writers claim that spat pushed Bishop Foley to ban the old style of mass in the entirety of the diocese. So Mother Angelica, so these issues you might be asking, like, why these don't really seem that important. Like, it's one guy's ego or I shouldn't say ego, it's one guy's, like, I'm being attacked as a cardinal, it's another guy, how do I say mass? But you'll see that these kind of had an influence later on. So Mother Angelica's and Mother Angelica died about 4 years ago on Easter Sunday. I was on Catholic media back then, on Catholic kind of Twitter and Catholic Reddit, and people lost their minds, honestly. They thought that it was like it was heaven itself opening for Mother Angelica. But her show ended in 2001 after she suffered a stroke. And so the last 15 years of her life, she kind of did a more private ministry. Her company, EWTN, is still alive, still strong. That's the logo on the left. It's in the United States, the Philippines, Germany, Poland, Latin America. They just started a new station in Africa. So it's still growing. And some people might ask me, well, I've never heard anyone watch this. But for some reason, it's powerful enough that it was able to score an interview with candidate Donald Trump in the before the 2016 election, and they still host Trump officials on their program throughout the years. They also have a written form called the National Catholic Register, which is on the right, that kind of does written programming. There's a lot of good writing on EWTN in 2020 and 2019, 2020 from the National Catholic Reporter. I highly recommend that you go check out their work. There's a lot of great reporting on where they get their funding, who funds this stuff, like their messaging, the association with the modern Republican Party. A lot of great articles out there. But what I want to focus on specifically is Church Militant and LifeSiteNews. These are two kind of far-right Catholic sources, new media sources, that take Mother Angelica's attacking liberal bishops and attacking movements like inclusive language to a whole new level. And so first I'm going to talk about LifeSiteNews. LifeSiteNews on the right is a Canadian company that got its start focusing on kind of seen as like anti-abortion issues, and so but they've moved on to more right-wing stuff, and so they will. I have the man, hold on, oof. Here we go. This is an example of something that they're published now. They've moved into much more farther right territory in the last few years. They published a few days ago they published an entire letter of a critic of Pope Francis who wrote a letter to Donald Trump that claimed that what's going on in the streets right now with the fight for racial justice is an internal struggle between good and evil playing right now, which was kind of an interesting choice of what they would run on their website. And moving on, Church Militant is The other station, a media company I want to talk about, they're run out of Detroit. Interesting that it's kind of the same location as Father Cochran 60, 70 years ago. But they're a rampantly far-right Catholic media source. I'd call them the Breitbart of the Catholic world. And they actually just got into the headlines this last week. This is an example of something that they would run on their company, on their website. You might have heard a few weeks ago, after Donald Trump cleared peaceful protesters from Lafayette Square and took the picture at St. John's Church. You know that story, but the day after, the president went to the shrine of St. John Paul II and took a picture there. And the Bishop of DC, Archbishop Gregory, pictured here, kind of criticized that the president used a Catholic shrine as a photo op. And so Church Militant played this video, which I'm not going to show the video. It's very offensive in my opinion, where they attacked the bishop that they saw as a liberal bishop by calling him a secret homosexual. They used racist slurs against him and said that he was lying. There's a lot there. And I'm just saying on my end that the USCCB and the Catholic bishops have not, as an institution, from my knowledge, criticized this company, even though they are very widely read in numerous parts of the country. The Diocese of Detroit has, but didn't name it. There's a lot of controversy there as well. And so you see, I mean, this is like a perfect example of how that kind of tamer, offensive media tactics of Mother Angelica in 2020, in the last week, has kind of amplified by 20 and has gone from kind of niche attacks on niche issues within the Catholic world to kind of viciously homophobic and racist and attacks on persons outside of that world. And there's tons more than this. The example I used before this, what just happened, was that LifeSiteNews, the company I talked about before, released there was a gay identifying pastoral associate at a church in Los Angeles, that they kind of published his name, address, picture, and pictures of him, his mom, and I think his partner, and someone slashed his tires, vandalized his office, tried to set fire to the church. There was a lot there, and so that was actually a New York Times front page story as well. So like I said, this is just an example that happened within the last 4 days. So this is like happening right now. Yeah, and so I just want to bring, this is the conclusion, I hope I'm doing well on time, that I said at the beginning of it. Following World Youth Day, Mother Angelica employed populist rhetoric against inclusive language and liberal bishops. Modern Catholic media employs this rhetoric to a greater degree by attacking specific individuals and movements, exemplified in those attacks within the last few days on Archbishop Gregory. And so I just want to end with some book recommendations. I love giving book recommendations very quickly. On the left, you have a book by Raymond Arroyo on her life. On the middle, you have a book called Voices of Empathy, which is kind of a history of Franciscan media in the United States. They talk a little bit about Mother Angelica in that book. And then Messengers of the Right, which is a great book that talks about the development of conservative media during the 20th century. It focuses mostly on political media, but they talk about religious media a little bit. And if you want to get in contact with me, feel free to send me an email or follow me on Twitter. And so I think now we're going to move into, I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, wow. Wow, that comment, I was not seeing that comment section. Yeah. Cool. So I think now, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask, or if you have any comments, you can ask. You can either chat it in the chat box. You can private message me a question if you don't want it seen by everyone, or you can unmute yourself and just ask a question. If that's okay, Miriam, we good?
Yep, that works. There's also the raise hand feature in Zoom, if that would be helpful, just so we're not talking over each other. But I think using the chat box is good. If you want